And with me on the stage, I have Alain Zali, who is a long-standing member of the research community, has been around for decades, more than 3 decades, I guess, with very insightful information to share about a large number of European research projects. We have Raphael Sachs on the stage, Technion in Israel, who also has been around for decades to share very insightful thoughts on where we're going as a community and the path forward. And Jenn McArthur, with whom together I have the big role of leading parts of the community of the CIB W78 forward. And I would like to hand over to Jenn for a more interactive part of this panel.
All right, so recognizing that it is early in the morning, I'm going to ask everybody to please stand up. We're going to play a little game. All right? Some of you are going to get to sit down fairly quickly. Others are going to be on your feet for a while, so I hope you're wearing comfortable shoes. It's always nice to get a sense of who's in the audience with us and who some of the veterans of these conferences are. So have a look around. We've got a good variety of people here. If this is your first CIB W78 or EC3 conference, you can have a seat. All right. If this is your second one, you can have a seat. Your third one. Fourth one. Wow, I was not expecting it to get this sparse this quick, including W78. Fifth one. I was going to say, Peter, you've been coming for years. Sixth one. Seventh one. Eighth one. Well, this is where I sit down. Ninth. 10th. 11th. 12th. 13th. 14th. 15th. So, Rob, you are actually the reason we're here, and we're going to call you up onto the stage now. We're really sorry.
As you've seen, Robert's not only actually he's not the last man standing, but the first man standing on a CIB W78. And this is, this morning's session is really more of looking back through 3 decades of research contributions. And it's meant to, and you probably have to turn your neck a little to see all the things. I'm sorry that for the last minute seat arrangements. Come on here, Rob. Sorry. Which is really meant more as an appreciation of all the things that you have done. As a little background story before we get into it, last year the CIB organization, which spans a lot of work groups and has meetings and various working groups, including the CIB W78, decided to change their model of the governance model. And an essential part of this governance model was that leaders of groups, the chairs of the individual working groups, had to be full institutional members, which meant a significant amount of money and a significant amount of contributions, financial contributions, and this was just not feasible. And we tried a lot of different approaches to kind of circumvent this, because Robert has been around for such a long time, and he has dedicated so many hours and days and years of his life to get this community going and to get them organized. And now he should pay an annual fee in order to continue this. We were very displeased with that, and we Jenn and I had the privilege to work along for some years now, and had the privilege also to get some money to get some money from via the EC3 and others to join the organization, to be allowed, graciously allowed by the CIB board to continue and to step in Robert's gigantic shoes. So we were really pleased with how this evolved, and it was clear that Robert would someday probably not be as actively involved, but we really didn't like it to be so sudden. So here's a little appreciation of all the things that you have done, or some of the highlights that you have done. And for those of you who didn't know, Robert has a Master of Computer Science from the University of Wellington in New Zealand, and has gotten involved into applying his knowledge and his insights and his research interests into the built environment for a long time. And one of the essential things included in here is a stay at the building research, the building research environment establishment in the UK, where he worked for 5 years and applying some of the fundamental principles of how to organize building information and apply it in this domain of ours that is so demanding when it comes to the organization of this type of information. He, among other things, and we're going to have a look at this in a moment, among other things, Robert has also always had a knack to travel as much and to meet as much people as possible, and to meet other research groups, and that's really something I think is an integral part of our community, to not only see each other for coffee and a coffee break over at a conference once or twice per year, but really to try to make an effort to visit each other's research laboratories. So during a stay at the BRE, at the Building Research Establishment, Robert also went to the TU Delft and was implanted there for half a year, involving a grant from a big EU project called Combine, which then led to, or which contributed to the things that he documented in his 1997 PhD thesis, a generalized framework for the design and construction of integrated design systems, and we're going to see some glimpses from that. And even though he kind of, I don't want to say went back to New Zealand, but because he always has been there, but he went back to New Zealand and became, over the years, evolved from a lecturer to an associate to a full professor in computer science at the University of Auckland, where he still is working today. He has hardly changed in facial, in his facial expression. And of course, next to the academic work, which we're going to look at in a moment a little deeper, really one of the, apart from all the papers and from all the citations and from all the influences and ideas that he had, really the biggest contributions comes from organizing this community and from bringing people together and for enabling local hosts really all over the world to organize a friendly community like this. So his first attendance on a CIB W78 workshop was in 1995 at Stanford, I think, where he met Raphael for the first time. So it was some years later, 8 years later, he picked up as a coordinator of the working group 78, and has been, I think, hardly missed a single, well, apart from last year, for example, when skiing and breaking his leg in the New Zealand winter, our summer, the northern summer. So this was the first one to really miss out in all these years. Apart from this really impressive leadership in the coordination of CIB W78, he has also picked up on being the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Information Technology and Construction, ITCon, which is the most important open access journal that we have in our community. Most of our core research members try to publish in, or aim to publish in, let's say, automation and construction, in the paid journals, which have their problem of their own. People like Bo Björk, who have stepped out of the research community to make an effort to allow open access journals to really spread the word without having been hidden behind a paywall, and that means battling the business models also of the big publishing companies. And so we also very much appreciate your work in this open access journal, because it's really important to not have all the knowledge that this community produces hidden behind these paywalls. So the ITCon journal really is something is a very integral part of spreading further what we develop in this community. Now, to pick up on some of the highlights from Robert's work, who really stood at the cradle of what we are calling today building information modeling and CDEs and collaboration means and so forth. This is a very funny artwork trying to, when mapping between different heterogeneous models goes wrong, then art is what you're seeing. And he worked on a lot of different topics, and I'm going to highlight here. I'm going to highlight a few of them. And others on the podium are going to take over in a minute. Agentic planning, so the idea that we could, that all the collaborators in a building project would have pieces of software represent what they're going to do and acting on behalf of what it is the particular roles have to do, trying to tear down the walls between the siloed away knowledge between simulations and CAD systems and expert systems, and really trying to connect all this work. When I appeared on on my first CIB W78 in Dresden, hosted by Scherer, who is going to be here in a minute, I was a young PhD student, and I stood very shyly in front of a really impressive, Robert, I'm sure you remember, it's a really impressive, like a castle, like a very festive gold-plated environment. And I said, well, and this is the top reference that I had. This was the first reference that I had in this, in my paper to present some OWL representation of Express. So I knew Robert's work before I had the chance to meet him first on a CIB W78 conference, and really paving the way to and facilitating to creating to facilitate interoperability and to enable researchers working in the field with the tools to actually model the information models in the first place, to map the information models in the first place, to distribute and to collaborate on the creation of schemas. So in this combine research work funded by the EU, which was one of a few of its kind at the time, the foundations really of what, for example, today IFC were laid. You agreed between different research projects to use Express as a modeling language, and Robert as a computer scientist developed a huge variety of tools. For example, documented in his thesis, but also documented in the individual research articles like this one from Automation and Construction in 1995, to show how people from the building and construction domain could actually model their information models. Things have slightly changed. IDMs are now something different than integrated data models in the past. There's a lot of DTs. There's a lot of DT in Robert's thesis, but DTs are not digital twins, they're design tools, and because there's only so many acronyms for the same kinds of things. I also had the personal pleasure to had Robert hosted in Eindhoven University when looking into various ways to map between IFC versions. This is still kind of, after all these decades, is an ongoing debate. How do we handle all these different versions, and how do we make sure that we can cope with the vast quantities and with the vast quality of more and more classes and of more and more relationships between these information artifacts. So this is a short glimpse into the work Robert has contributed over the years with regard to interoperability, and I'll hand it over to Jenn to talk about other aspects of his work.
Great, thanks, Jakob. So I'm very passionate about energy. And actually, it's really interesting. I was just doing a deep dive into Robert's early energy work. So this is, I don't want to date myself, but it was back when I was in high school. And he was laying the foundations for energy modeling. And all of the stuff that I grew up with through university in terms of the weather files, he created some of the first weather files for New Zealand when he started. There were 4. He created another 22, I think, which is painstaking work. Created sets of building archetypes that you could use for solar, like radiance modeling as well as energy modeling, which is exhausting work. I'm trying to do it now in Toronto, and just the sheer amount of work to do this, but this is the foundation, right? It's one of those weird things that doesn't necessarily get cited, but my guess is that there are thousands of projects that have relied on the work, if not tens of thousands that have relied on the work that he did back in the early 90s, painstakingly making these models that actually made it possible to actually do this work. So one of the really interesting papers that I came across that Robert had done was Thermal Designer. So it was a really early prototypes tool where he was actually looking to try and support thermal design analysis. It was able to support compliance checking for insulation thicknesses, but also really understand all of this like energy data in a graphical way, right? We've been having all these little niche things. I don't know if anybody else remembers doing like computer simulations in the late 90s and early 2000s, having to go into like a Unix window, doing it all in VI. It was basically text-based, like you're really lucky if you had an icon you could click. But he had something that actually mixed in both geometric input, like modern CAD tools, and thermal analysis, and all of this into one system that was actually usable. And this was kind of one of the first of its kind that then got developed over the years. So if you look at it, this is not that different in terms of how we think about kind of the structure of approaching energy modeling. It's just, you know, it's kind of one of those cores that keeps going further and further, right? The next one that I thought was really interesting was the total building evaluation. And this really hit me because I sat in the session that Robert chaired yesterday afternoon, and I watched people talk about how do we look at the same piece of information and the same element in an architectural model and a structural model, and how do we actually share the data between them without losing that? Well, this is back in 1993. Robert was asking the same question. And he was actually looking at how do you actually create this integrated environment to actually share the data back and forth without replicating, without losing, and actually being able to keep everything. So you can actually have all of these specialist tools that still do what they need to and having the multiple model views, but actually be able to fully integrate it. And this integration we're we're increasingly trying, this is the ideal that we're all aiming for, at least in practice, is to have this fully integrated analysis, these fully integrated models where we can consider everything. And I think some of us think that this is relatively new, but like 30 years ago, we had all of this work. And there's this abstractive hierarchy that when I look at it reminds me of the IFCs that we have now, and just the way that everything's developed over the last few years has been absolutely fascinating. It's been kind of wild to go back to papers that were published back before I even realized that this was an area I wanted to do research in, and see that the foundations go a lot deeper than I thought. And my friend sitting next to me actually had a major part to play in that. Jakob's already talked a little about Express. You can't talk about any sort of early stage design integration or design synthesis without looking at Express, right? And it was really interesting when he was looking at, one of the things that I found really interesting about that was the programming environment actually allowed you to create these schema and have the schema kind of have a canonical view of the schema. So you could make changes to one schema, but you'd never actually lose the core. You'd never lose what made it important. So you could have consistency all the way through, and you could have updated views and updated information, but you would never lose this kind of canonical representation that you had at the beginning. So you'd never have this error that would trickle in and propagate, and you'd actually lose the core of it. At least that's what I got around. And for its time, incredibly simple navigation, right? This was back in 1995. I remember learning AutoCAD and doing AutoCAD on a work term in 1998, and that was the year that they rolled out AutoCAD with a mouse, and you could click on things rather than just coding in the coordinate systems. So for its time, this was really ahead of its time, and it was an incredibly powerful design tool. The last thing that really blew me away, and this is part of this broader combined project, was the ICA Tech 2, and if you look at it, you can still find references to this currently, as it's just an integration of all of these building design tools. So how do you actually pull together all of these different views? And can you actually bring together everything into this common data environment and actually properly do simulation, properly consider all of this early stage design? So as somebody who came to academia from a design practice standpoint, it really struck me just how well established this was and how far back it went. So it's really interesting. Actually, I encourage you to actually go through and just do a little Google, look for any topic, or go through his Google Scholar and just go back a few pages. You'll have to scroll down and hit quite a number of times to get down to the earlier stuff. But it's absolutely fascinating to see where some of these ideas came from. And now, let me pass on to Raphael.
Well, thank you all. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jakob. And thanks to Robert. That's the main reason we're here. In this part, I'll talk very briefly about Robert's contributions in code compliance research, and then we'll play another little parlor game. So code compliance research really goes back, I guess, to the start of Robert's career. And I think we can fairly honestly say that that was an age of innocence. It was an age of innocence in that we had big ideas. We thought we knew how this could be done. As you can see, this paper is from 1991 in the journal Building and Environment, Integrating Design Tools for Total Building Evaluation, where evaluation essentially means let's figure out how they perform and what the building's behavior is, with the intent of figuring out if that complies with the behavior we desire. This was a time when expert systems were pretty much in vogue, perhaps toward the end of their period of stardom. And people had assumed that one could build expert systems for medical diagnosis, to assist nurses to perform the work of doctors. I think we're not quite there yet, although nowadays, 30 years later, we are approaching that point. But in terms of buildings, when you had to load up your software into memory from a floppy disk that had 640 kilobytes, and you had to load up the operating system, take it out, load up the compiler, take it out, and then run your software, that was a bit more challenging. And so it was reduced really to if-then rules. And yet, you see here in a paper from much later, regulatory knowledge and coding guidelines for automated compliance audit of building engineering design, that we're still at it in 2014, and dare I say, in 2025. But the thread of Robert's work continues. Here we go, another paper, Computerizing Regulatory Knowledge for Building Engineering Design, much more recent, and something a little bit from 2016, Modeling and Accessing Regulatory Knowledge for Computer-Assisted Compliance Audit. So from fairly early on, Robert, I think this has been a theme that you've continued, and together with Yanis Dimiadi and Wawan Solihin and many others, it's continued. I can go on, and I will. The critical role of accessible data for BIM-based automated rule-checking systems, a paper written together with Chuck Eastman. And both Robert and I had the privilege to work with Chuck, and indeed to meet at Georgia Tech for a period. And a lot of that work was inspired by Chuck's earlier papers from the 1970s, which envisaged building information modeling. You mentioned, Jakob, that three-letter acronyms have undergone many life stages, and BIM is no less one of them. But in 1974, 75, Chuck really had laid out the foundations, the principle, the ideas of BIM, well before the notion of building information modeling became popular. So, simplified schema queries for supporting BIM-based rule-checking applications. Again, another paper with the same team. The promise of automated compliance checking. A little later this morning, we're going to ask some questions, Robert, and you can prepare yourself by knowing that I'm going to ask you if we have fulfilled the promise of automated compliance checking. That's a rhetorical question. We know the answer, but it'll be interesting to hear your explanations of why not yet. And then intermediate representations to improve the semantic parsing of building regulations. This is a very recent paper, 2024, so just last year. And I think that many of you in the audience are engaged in this area of research, particularly in semantic enrichment, in parsing, in preparing information, pre-processing codes, regulations, and so on. And so with some 27 papers in the field from 1993 to 2025, and about 1,000 citations on this particular body of work, Robert is recognized as a leader in the field of design checking and code compliance. And I guess it's still going. This is not only a past reflection, but a future perspective. But perhaps one of the earliest ones, and I'm be happy if you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but thermal design and application of object-oriented code conformance architecture, 1992. So that really was trailblazing at the time, and it raised the promise for everyone else. I became aware of this work, indeed, in 1995 at a CIB W78 in Stanford, when I was still in primary school. But checking conformance with a thermal insulation standard. And perhaps one of the key things that one ought to appreciate here is this term object-oriented building model. That was not a given at all. This was in a time where relational databases were ruling the world. Object-oriented programming was very novel and new. And so the notion that you could apply object-oriented programming and analysis to building models was in itself a novel idea. Okay, and now something for now, as I say, for something completely different. Perhaps you've all seen the cartoons or the books, Where in the World Was Wally? Well, we're not going to play Where in the World Was Wally, but we're going to play Where in the World Was CIB W78? And the challenge, it's a group test. This is not a competition of individuals, but we'll see how we as an audience are able to answer. Robert, you are required not to answer, because we guess you would have the most intimate knowledge of all of these. So audience, if you know the answer, shout it out, but you have to know the place and the year. Okay? So where in the world and when in the world was CIB W78? I'm going to show you a photograph or two or three each time, and you're going to tell us where and when CIB W78 was organized with Robert as coordinator. Yes, we start off with an easy one. Where in the world was CIB W78 in this photograph? Don't be shy. Thank you, Katerina. Porto, and what year? That is correct. There you go, Porto 2025. Now that we've warmed up and got the idea, Where in the world was CIB W78? Beijing, I heard. What year? Correct. Well done. All right. Moving along. Where in the world was CIB W78? Oh, I've put the answer. Oh my God. That's embarrassing. That would have been a hard one. Okay, here's a tough one. Robert is not in that photograph for some reason. I will reveal to you, though, that they had a mistake in the number of people and the accommodation, and we had to share rooms. And guess who I shared a room with? Yes. What year? Mpumalanga, South Africa, 2001. Yeah, that was a special one. That was a good one. We shared a room, indeed. It was a pleasure. Okay, where in the world was CIB W78? You're on the wrong continent. Okay, well, we're not going to get a full score on this. This is Montreal, 2006. Okay, here's a fun one. Egypt. Ekaterina, you're our star today. That's Egypt, Cairo. Here's another one, another photograph. I'm sorry. We don't have the videos. No. Cairo 2010. All right. This, to be fair, I will accede up front. This was not CIB W78, but indeed a CIB World Building Congress. Anyone? Robert? Finland, indeed. This is Tampere in 2016, not very long ago. This photograph is not from the conference, but it is of the city in which the conference was held. Dresden, thank you very much. What year? (2005). This is the one that Robert Jacob was referring to earlier. The bridge was standing then. They crossed it in 2005. Okay, here we go. Where was CIB W78? Morocco. Marrakesh last year. Wonderful. Okay, a tough one. Xinjiang, you get to answer this one. What year? There you go, Luxembourg 2021. And Xinjiang was the proud winner of the Charles Eastman PhD Award. Well done. Okay. Oh, that was quick. Chicago 2018, the last conference that Chuck was able to attend. Okay, here's another good one. Many of you were there. No offers? Greece. Greece is good. We need more specific. Heraklion 2017. Okay. All right. That's the end of my piece. Alain.
In English, I presume? Or shall I speak in French? Okay. Thank you very much, Ralph. Very good morning to everyone. I was asked to tell about small pieces of my life with Robert. Professional life, don't be scared about it. And by the way, yeah, of course, your wife is not here today. Okay, that's good news. Anyway, but let me start maybe with a short anecdote, and the link with one of your slides, Ralph, is very, very good. I've been supporting Sylvain Kubicki from Leeds to organize the 2021 conference in Luxembourg. And I remember that we were at this gala dinner having a cruise on the Moselle River. And unfortunately, at that time, yes, Robert was not able to join because, of COVID restriction in 2021, of course. That was not possible. That was very, very difficult to travel. And but at the same time, we wanted, of course, to have someone to have kind of a small speech, to welcome people. And we asked Timo to do so, and he did it very, very well. But he was not aware about the numbering of the conference, And of course, I told him, okay, this is the 38th conference, 38th CIB W78 conference. And then suddenly, everyone was looking at me, just like a dinosaur. And I just informed them, and I want to reiterate this, that I was not attending the first CIB W78 conference. So I may be considered as a dinosaur, but probably, hopefully, not as a fossil yet, I would say. But just for your information, I'm pretty sure that very few of you are aware of that. The CIB W78 was really kicked in Stockholm in 1983, but that was just to kick it, and that was just one day, I guess. The real first conference was in London in 1984, London in UK. And at that time, that was indeed less than 50 people representing, I guess, something like 9 or 10 countries. And just imagine today that I guess there were nearly, for this conference, 200 papers. I'm sorry to confess that I've not counted the number of countries, but you can imagine how has been the progress and how we have shifted in dimension for this conference. And honestly, believe me, this is also the success of this guy that whom we are celebrating today. So I wanted to have this anecdote, and I would like to say that, well, I met Robert, that was indeed more than 30 years ago. Unfortunately, we're getting old, but that was more than 30 years ago. And at that time, indeed, I was working at CSTB, the French National Research Center in Building and Construction. And we were involved in, I was involved in European project, and Robert was involved as well at that time in European project. I was not in the combined project that Jenn, or maybe you mentioned it. I was not involved in this project, but then of course I was involved in many projects. And I'm sharing one specificity with Robert. I'm absolutely not coming from the construction sector initially. I've been working 10 years in pure computer science, and my PhD indeed is leveraging on the theory of semantics and programming languages. So my background basically at the very start was not in the construction sector, and that's the case as well for Robert. But then we specialized, of course, our expertise in this domain of computer science for the construction sector. And in the 90s, indeed, we have been working on interoperability. And that was already, as it was mentioned by all of you, that was the case of Robert as well. So we got the opportunity, of course, to meet. The first time we met, you were working for the Center for Construction IT, I guess, in the B area, which unfortunately disappeared at the very beginning of the 2000 years. And this is when, indeed, Europe loses a brilliant researcher like Robert, because you were back to New Zealand then. And so we had the opportunity. The first time I met Robert, that was with Dave Blomfield, I guess. And you can imagine that, of course, for a poor French guy like me, yes, well, Dave Blomfield, Robert Amor, this sounds like English names. So for me, Robert was English first. But then, of course, I learned that he was coming from New Zealand. And we were indeed working in interoperability and in all those aspects of structuring data through models. So the 90s were really about modeling, and that was the start, of course, of all the work which was done later on around BIM and BIM technology, of course. And then at the very, very beginning of the 2000 years, we thought that, well, we need more semantics, and we started to work with ontologies as well. And for us, ontologies was a way also to deal with code compliance checking. So I've been also involved in code compliance checking quite a lot, and that was, of course, a way for us to keep on sharing quite a lot of expertise. We never wrote, by the way, and that has been a mistake on my side, we never wrote a common paper on that. which is probably a little bit of a shame, but well, anyway. But in all cases, we have shared all these. And leveraging on these ontologies were also the basis for us to deal with knowledge management at that time in CSTB. And when I've tried in the middle of the 2010 years to have a view on what was done over the last 25 years, of course, well, there were, of course, popping up quite a lot of the work that has been presented by my colleagues, which was achieved by Robert. And I've taken this one, BEAM in 2007, Are We There Yet?, where you were already raising in part of the point about the problem of the data model interpretation. And last year at the EC3 Conference, I noticed that, for instance, Leon van Berlo mentioned the fact that they were thinking about having part of the BEAM models, being compiled in order to avoid this kind of thing. So this means that, well, 15 years after, well, your thoughts indeed are still totally valid, and this is something which is quite impressive. I've been also, I don't like those animations, sorry for that. I've been, of course, also having quite a lot of interaction with Robert as far as different CIB conferences have been organized. And I got the privilege to organize one myself. So I went in Cairo to prepare a little bit myself, because I thought, well, it's something which is very, very tough, and you have to spend quite a lot of time on it. Then definitely I confirmed that, of course, it's huge work, but I must say that life was so easy with Robert that this was really a great pleasure to organize it. So that was indeed in the south of France, on the French Riviera, where I'm living and working, in Sophia Antipolis, which is halfway between Nice and Cannes. In 2009, I got also the opportunity to join a conference which was about knowledge management and the working group 102. And what was also very, very, very nice on my side is that Robert was very, very open to support, having more interactions, more cross-fertilization between various groups. And that was an opportunity for me and for us indeed to do a dual conference, W78 and W102, but also inviting different technical groups of the CIB, and also our American friends of the FIADEC, who are really dealing with impacting, well, the research impact on the construction sector and on the industry side of it. So that was something which was really, really brilliant. And when indeed we have been organizing this conference, at the end of the day, we were also talking about sustainable homes and smart buildings, and at the end of the day, that was a full week. At that time, there was, of course, not the LDAC workshop yet. There was not the EC3 summer school, but we were capable to organize a one full week. And Robert was very, very supportive in helping me in organizing things, and also in defining many, many of the topics. And you can see that many of them are still valid today. There was one, for instance, just picking one, about artificial intelligence and decision support systems. As I mentioned to you before, I worked in construction IT. I was more on the computer science, and in the 80s, I was developing expert systems on my side. But at that time, we were dramatically lacking data. Okay, maybe now we have a little bit too many data, so we have to manage all those data. But at that time, we were lacking data, but we were conscious about the fact that this could have a high potential in the future. So that was, and you can probably recognize many of the keywords that are quite still valid today. And that was something that have been elaborated also with the support of Robert. And I can imagine that he has been helpful in supporting all of you, at least all of you, all those who have been organizing many of those CIB conferences. Just to say that also he has been, Robert is someone who is very, very curious and really help, I would say, sharing sharing not only science, of course, but also sharing culture and sharing life with people. So you had quite a lot of sabbatical leaves, I guess, in South Korea, in the US, in Australia, in the Netherlands as well, in Switzerland at the ETH. But we have the pleasure to welcome him as well at CSTB. What is a little bit of pity on my side is that indeed I invited Robert, and then, well, I decided to shift a little bit my professional career, so I was not myself welcoming it in 2019 because I left CSTB in 2018. But I know that this has been very well appreciated by all our CSTB colleagues. And at that time, it was definitely not for holidays. I've been checking these because I thought, okay, on the French Riviera, you really enjoy sun, sea, mountains, many, many things. Just think about, yes, trying to get mushrooms, you know, on the countryside with Bruno. So I thought, okay, maybe he had relaxing time there, but no, definitely I just extract some of the many papers he wrote at that time. And we were used as well, and I will finish with this one, we were used from time to time, because I'm living in France, he's living in New Zealand, of course, and we were used each time we meet during the CIB conference to ask ourselves about, okay, how are you doing, how was the trip, how is the jet lag, you know? And of course, well, that's true that you have been suffering far more than me about the jet lag, because you have been often time traveling to the US, to Europe. But at least that has been different in two specific times, I would say, which was those two conferences in Brisbane and in Melbourne, where, by the way, you nicely invited me to make a keynote. And these have been, of course, very, very good memories. We were not that many European guys traveling up to Australia, but I've not missed those ones, at least on my side, trying to represent a little bit Europe with few of my colleagues, of course. But that was really great times. And for you, of course, it was easier to travel to Australia than to travel to Porto, for instance. But that was very, very good memory with the two main organizers, so Robin Dragmüller in Brisbane and Guillermo in Melbourne. So all this has been part of my life. And when I said that, yes, I was not at the first CIB W78 conference, definitely. But when I was asked, when Jakob got back to me and said, well, let's try to celebrate this guy, I was thinking myself, but well, for me, yes, I've always considered that CIB. When I'm thinking about CIB W78, I was thinking naturally, I would say, to Robert. So for me, you have been indeed representing, you have been steering, influencing, and provided us so many passion for construction IT. So that was really for me the reference, at least for CIB W78. Shall I conclude? Well, I conclude this first part because it's not totally finished. We have not finished yet with Robert this morning. But yes, so what we wanted to do is, I will tell it first in French, and then, of course, we'll translate in English. So, merci pour tout, mon cher ami. Thank you so much, my dearest. Thank you.
So, two more items to go on. This one is Andak, also from Raphael. What do you lose what do you do when you lose a piece of a building? Well, Robert has a quite interesting answer to that
one. There is no shortage of interesting people to talk to around here. And I have here Robert Amor, who is from the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Welcome.
Hi.
First, I want to ask you about this interesting thing that you're wearing. It's Maori?
Good luck charm. Yeah,
what?
It's my good luck charm. Yeah, so it's a Maori artifact. The gods apparently fished up the North Island of New Zealand with a magic fishhook, and this is my magic fishhook. So
Wow. Do you need good luck? Do you need good luck here?
Yeah, flying over water, I think you want good luck.
I see. But you are interested in a very I think it's a fascinating field, which is the intersection of computers and architecture and construction. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. So construction informatics is looking at how you can use computer science to build better buildings and help the people who are working in our buildings make better buildings. We know that our buildings are 20 to 30% inefficient, too costly, taking too long to build, and these are looking at techniques that we can give us better buildings, cheaper, faster, and that work for the people who are going to live in them.
And also there are all sorts of new and fascinating buildings being built all over the world, in China and in Dubai, and all these really tall, wild-looking buildings, and they require, they're more complex.
Yeah, if we didn't have computers, we couldn't put these together. Every piece is different, every piece has to go together in just the right way at just the right time, and if you can't make that happen, the buildings won't work.
And you were also saying, surprisingly, that sometimes these components get made, they're brought to the construction site, someone lays it down, and they get lost.
Yeah, they never find them again, yeah.
And so they have to make a new one?
That's often the cheapest way to do it, is just to get another one made, yeah. So we should be able to do better than that,
Absolutely.
RFID tags, we can know where things are, we know when they come on site, we can find them again when we need them. But we're only just starting to look at how that can be done.
Interesting field, and it'll be a lot more efficient when the day is done.
Oh, here's hoping, yeah. Save us taxpayers some money when they put up the next hospital.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Robert. Really appreciate it.
Sorry. So, Robert, thank you so much for all your contributions. This is going to be continued in a minute afterwards. We have a couple of you. We want to hear you, of course, as well. And we have pertaining to the things that we have seen and the glimpses of what you've been accomplishing. And maybe I'll hand it over to Jenn to kick it off with her question.
Sure. So I was talking a little bit about your early work with the energy modeling, or the energy support, but one of the things that's really interested me is that recently we've been talking about computer games and serious games, and you've done a lot of really interesting work. I really love the altruistic or the saving humanity aspect of your research. That's always kind of attracted me. So can you tell a little bit, you were using computer games to help kind of post-earthquake or do like earthquake preparedness, and especially for like deaf and hard of hearing children. So I'm just curious, how do you see computer games really being part of how we can communicate things differently? Because I think it's an area that some of us have started playing in the last couple of years and thought it was brand new, and then of course we look back and we've been doing it for a while. I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you. Can I just say bugger? These guys really got me. I was sitting in the audience and I was thinking, it's really nice just to sit in the audience and watch all the other guys do the hard work. And man, these guys are getting old. It's great they're up on the stage, and this old guy doesn't have to be on the stage. Thank you very much for that. Very, very unexpected. And I think what they've demonstrated, and I think what we've often said at W78 meetings is, it really feels like a family, and it's our get-togethers, our family reunions, and I know so many of you from over the years. I'm sure a few more people should have been standing when she got to 4 or 5 W78s, because I've seen a lot of people here and at many of those conferences. But that's really made it. The connections, the meetups. We've been to many fantastic places over the years, and thanks to yourselves who have organised these conferences, who have made these suggestions, who have brought us to Porto and South Africa and Iceland and India next year. So many, many very interesting and exciting places to see what's happening in those areas. And it's been fantastic. I've loved every minute of it. Until CIB changed the rules. It's been a really, really good time, and I've really enjoyed trying to help the community and lead the community and develop there. And I think I've said to people many times, I look back at it and I've been working on co-compliance checking for 30 years, and lots of research in lots of different areas. But really, I think it's the development of the community which is the lasting impact. And you know, I've counted it, it's around 10,000 students that I've taught about human-computer interaction. You know, we need more of that. You know, that's going to be the legacy. And I think it's the conferences that we've run, the young researchers who have developed through this, myself included, because I was a PhD student when we first met back in '95. You know, it's that development of the community which is the lasting impact that we have leading something like W78, and seeing, you know, wonderful researchers develop and seeing the research grow and being able to contribute to that as we go through. That's where the impact's going to be. So yeah, the research is fun, but this is what matters. Yeah. And what was your question?
I just thought it was wild that you were doing serious games. And I'm curious about, like, where you see games going as maybe part of the broader tool for us within the IT and construction space.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if that's even going to last, because I think the serious games was a way of building really sophisticated environments, good collaborative environments, where you didn't have to put so much effort into the development, because the serious game gave you that platform, gave you the characters, gave you the space, gave you a lot of the collaboration tools that you needed. But now, you know, say 5 words and you've got an app sitting on your phone. You know, that seems to be changing really, really fast. But yeah, I think the serious games really give us a leg up. And I think for many things we should be having more legs up, because it's building on the shoulder of giants. You know, we always say I built on the work in the 60s on code compliance checking, and you know, we all develop on top of it. But so often in those earlier years, and I think even now, we really do start from scratch and build things from, you know, fairly basic libraries, and it doesn't seem like, you know, I can grab a code base and work on someone else's code base and develop on top of a code base. It's still really hard to find data. Yes, we're drowning in data, but you know, try and get a curated set of clauses from codes that you can use and reuse. That's still really hard. And so this notion of building on top of more and more sophisticated systems, I think is something that we as an area, discipline, still need to develop. And I think serious games is a good model for kind of how you might do that, building on top of more and more sophisticated systems.
Thanks.
All right. So we've obviously reversed the panel discussion, right? Instead of one interviewer and a panel, we have 4 interviewers and 1 panel member, and you're it.
What's the job?
So Robert, we saw in the series of papers and in your record that in the 90s and perhaps 2000s, and in your PhD thesis indeed, you spent a lot of time working on the challenge of enabling designers of buildings, architects, engineers of many, many different kinds, and construction people too, to collaborate and to be able to work together across virtual models of the things they were either designing or building, simulating, testing, constructing, procuring, and so on, demolishing perhaps. And what grew out of that was, I think your work reflected a desire to help people to collaborate, not simply to exchange data or information about buildings, but to have a meaningful collaboration among them. And a lot of the interoperability problems that were central in the formation of building product modeling, which Alain mentioned and described so well, which grew into the change from relational databases to object-oriented database, and that stood behind the development of industry foundation classes in the IFC. But my question to you is this: has that run its course? In the sense that we see now that most of the vendors of design software still exist in islands. Perhaps not as many islands, because some of the software companies are falling by the wayside or being acquired by the big 4 or 5. But nevertheless, there is the Autodesk and the Bentley and the Nemetschek and the Trimble perhaps, and the hexagon camps, but they remain isolated. And I think that I'm curious to know your thoughts about whether this is not a question of building another more sophisticated layer or a more sophisticated implementation of what we've had so far, but do we need a paradigm change? And we've seen recently much more work on graph representations. And so I'm curious to hear your analysis of that thread from relational databases through object-oriented schema for data exchange to perhaps now we need actually a new model, a post-BIM or a new BIM model for collaboration in design.
Yeah, let's change the world, shall we? Yeah, I think I said in one of the presentations yesterday, I was really pleased to see someone still doing work on interoperability, because I really feel that's fallen by the wayside, and don't think it's a solved problem. It's, I think it's still fundamental, and as you say, there are still many camps, many islands. One of the pieces of work we did at the BRE was looking at how much software there is in the industry. I think we counted 4,500 different software tools that are available for architects, engineers in the design community, and and that shows the scale of the interoperability problem. I think one of Chuck Eastman's projects, he looked at how many pieces of software a particular company would use that needed bits of the building, and it was 30, 23, 30, somewhere like that within an organization, because it was your finance and your billing and not the things that we normally think of, but the whole infrastructure needs information about that. And we're not seeing good interoperability between those. We still don't see asset management still crying out for data. They can't get hold of BIM models. There's really not a good transfer between BIM and the asset management stage. This is all, we're getting more and more tools, and I guess in my grumpy old age, I look at some of these tools and think, well, you're just pushing the problem off. And sorry, Peter, ontologies, and people developing ontologies and then saying, well, and of course with the ontology we can do interoperability. And no, just having an ontology doesn't automatically give you interoperability, and there needs to be that alignment between it, and we see how difficult that alignment is, and we can't find the matching terms. So I think there's a really big problem there still, and unless we all speak IFC, that's still not enough, because you don't want IFC as the central model in your tool. It's an interoperability exchange model, and it's great for the exchange of semantics and building information, but it's not going to be the core of your tool. And if it's not the core of your tool, you have to map between IFC and your tool, and then all the interoperability problems come back again. There needs to be something different. I don't know what it is. In my early work, I said we should formalize mappings and have explicit mappings, not just between versions of IFC, but between a tools representation and an IFC representation. So you could look at, you could examine, how the information was being mapped between those and visual representations and whatever. And with that sort of formal mapping, then you can generate the code and you can give that guarantee of consistency. But yeah, there's 4,500 tools out there. That's a lot of mappings to do, and we know that's very, very difficult. So no, I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think it's going to be solved before I retire. I leave it to the young generation to find a solution, because we still know it's 20 to 30% inefficient to design and build a building. That's been the case for every report that's come out of Europe and the UK for 30 years, keeps on saying there's still this 20-30% inefficiency in what we're doing. And I believe, as we saw figures from one of the papers yesterday, the cost of poor interoperability is enormous, and we should be solving it. however many billion, what's the, anyone remember how many billion is it a year in the US? That money put into research, 10% of that money put into research, 1% of that money put into research, we might actually find good solutions for that problem.
Well, if I may, a follow-on question, Robert. I think there may be conceptual ideas that are floating around now in terms of graph representations that do go a long way to doing that, and especially in terms of some of the other work that you did, which is now being applied in that area, that interoperability might really be an issue of process rather than product, in the sense that instead of fixed mappings, we may now be able to use different AI tools to do that interpretation and mapping, and it grows with time because they're learning from the context as our use of terms and concepts changes as people and as the way we build buildings changes. But I wanted to pick up on something else.
Don't the AI tools scare you?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Do they scare you?
Yeah, they scare me. I think. I mean, I guess I've been working with AI tools since the 90s, but I guess I always think of the hype cycle, you know, and I'm always concerned that people always get captured by the top of the hype cycle and what you can do, and I'm a bit more of a Luddite, and I think more of the bottom of the hype cycle, you know, and perhaps, you know, some of the things that can go wrong. And I mean, we've seen 2 AI winters already, you know, where AI has been overhyped and people have bought into and invested huge amounts in developing in AI areas, and it's proved not to be as powerful as was thought, and suddenly everyone leaves the area, and you have a long period where very little happens in the area. And we're now getting up to the hype cycle again, and it still worries me that, you know, that we will hit another one of those peaks, and disillusionment will follow, and we'll lose a lot of the money that's there. You know, we always take a step up, so it's never a loss, but yeah, I worry about the people who, you know, who've always loved black boxes and trust the answers that come out of systems, and AI to me, is another one of those black boxes, and I worry about people trusting them. People trust them too much already, and yeah, so it scares me.
Which one can time? Okay. So I would love to respond, but I think I'd rather leave. I'd rather leave your thoughts present on that. I mean, perhaps it should worry us not so much as investors, since most of us are not necessarily, but we are educators and researchers. And as educators and researchers, from my perspective, I certainly see lower demand for engineering students, for software and computer science students. We see in our university declines in the number of people. We see declines in graduates looking for jobs and not finding them, because particularly in structural engineering and in software engineering, those jobs aren't being taken per se, but 60-70% of the work is being done by machines, which means we need fewer people. And I think as researchers, our challenge is to respond to that with how these things should be used. And the number of papers in this conference on the topics of LLMs, of code checking, of various other applications, I think are very appropriate. We're no longer where we were perhaps 20, 30 years ago of trying to build those tools ourselves, but we're more focused perhaps now on their intelligent use by people. So they hold great promise.
Can I just say,
please.
You know, and the thing that concerns me for our profession is that a lot of those young career jobs are the ones which are being replaced at the moment, you know, and so it's okay for the very experienced people who still need that expertise, but I really worry how we grow the people into the profession where there's not so much demand for the jobs there.
Well, clearly time will tell. You talked about the interoperability problem, and we discussed the different companies. I'm curious to hear your reflection on the many years of research in this area, not so much as coordinator of CIB, but as a researcher in the field, whether perhaps we have suffered as a research community from the fact that our influence on the industry, and when I say on the industry, I mean the software industry, the developers of the BIM and other design software, have been less attentive to what we're doing than we might have hoped, and that the commercial interests have driven the development and maintained the problems of interoperability, perhaps not so much because we couldn't figure out how to solve them, but because they served commercial interests.
It does worry me that, so I'm from computer science, and I see how it works in other parts of computer science. If you go to SIGGRAPH, which is the big conference about graphics in computer science, the developers are all there, and every year at SIGGRAPH, the developers talk about how they implemented the latest technique from the last year and how it didn't work. And there's this very tight time frame, where developers are learning from the researchers, trialing what the researchers put forward, reporting back to the research community about what they've done in there. I don't see that in this place. I think we have Autodesk and research and others as sponsors here, so there is a little connection there, but it's 4,500 developers out there, companies doing software here, and there's not 4,500 companies represented here. There's not 40 companies represented here. So that tight coupling between research and the industry really seems to be missing. And I don't know how we make, I think we've tried in W78 a number of times to get closer to industry, and we've never really been able to maintain that. And I think that's a shame. It would be good to have more of that.
Thank you very much.
So I'll try to be short, but I would say that the discussion between Raf and Robert was very, very interesting and helped me in some way in my question. CUT compliance checking and rule-based systems. You mentioned that you have been working for more than 30 years on this, and I was also very, very passionate by it, I would say, in the 90s and the 20s. And my question is a little bit related, by the way, to the young generation as well. And so there is now, of course, a hype on all those aspects related to artificial intelligence. You just mentioned one point about it. Maybe you're going to get back to it as well. So LLMs, and not only LLMs, but maybe also small language models, new methodologies, like, for instance, retrieval augmented generation. I'm not asking necessarily about your views, as a global point of view on these, but what would be, for instance, your 2 or 3 recommendations to our young researchers on how to dive into it and how to deal with it in their future research? I've seen that there are quite a lot of research ongoing in this aspect. We're used, well, in the past to have, well, we have structure, semi-structured, sometimes unstructured data. We have knowledge, which is sometimes prescriptive. We have prescriptive rules, but sometimes performance-based rules, and sometimes not that easy to represent rules. So maybe AI has some potential, but how to exploit it and without getting to final views or final outcomes on that. What would be your 2 or 3 recommendations to our young researchers in the audience?
Oh, so they're not going to like this, but I'm a computer scientist. You're a computer scientist. I always go back to fundamentals, and I really believe people need to understand more of the fundamentals of the discipline before they take the next step. And knowing what a relational database is and what third normal form gives you is far more powerful than looking at the latest RAG and looking at So I always, my recommendation always is to understand some of the fundamentals of computer science and what the different aspects. Data representations, the rule-based systems, the relational systems, object-oriented systems, what are they and what do they actually give you in terms of representation and quality of information and minimal information, knowing complexity and complexity, a little bit of complexity theory, and say how much time is it going to take for my program to do this calculation? Is it even feasible with the even with the amazing compute that we have now? Having those understandings, I really think gives you the ability to take those next steps and look at an LLM and say, well, okay, what is this going to give me? I understand data, I understand the need for quality data, and without quality data, none of these tools work. So I bore everyone and say, forget about all the fancy stuff, go back to the basics. And if you understand the basics, then all of the fancy stuff becomes much more powerful for you.
I would say that I fully agree with you. I would like just to mention that I've recently read that, well, maybe this is to be cross-checked anyway, but I read that, for instance, if you want to do just a single addition, having a computer doing just a single addition, in a classical way, it takes you 100 CPU instructions. And if you're trying to do the same thing with artificial intelligence, computing systems, for instance, it will cost you millions of CPU instructions. So this is exactly what you said. We have to think about what is behind it and what is the best way to use it. I'm not at all against artificial intelligence, and I do believe that this is one of the key orientations. But it's very important to have a critical view on each and every technology that we are investigating, indeed, and try, of course, to get the most of the benefits of this technology, but to do the good things in some specific situations. There is not one technology being able to do everything.
And I think we say the same in civil engineering, that we still want the students to understand the fundamentals, even if the AI tools are going to be able to solve many of the problems that we set them. They don't understand the fundamentals, and they can't rise to a level of being able to apply knowledge to the harder problems that they're going to have. And
speaking about early career researchers and ways to come together and probably pool some of those challenges that we have. We've been talking for a number of times that universities keep or introduce three mandatory journal papers. They introduce more and more. They introduce more and more requests for going to conferences and so forth. There's also a matter of not only of the scaling for the individual PhD student, for the researcher that has to go through more and more layers of technology in order to do something on top of all the pyramid of shoulders of giants. But it's also, we're getting also bigger and bigger. There's the need. How do we get out of this scalability problem, both on the content that has to be learned from the fundamentals until the latest and greatest, and the scalability of the community that grows and grows and grows.
Yeah, us old guys are lucky, weren't we? Because the base of knowledge was much smaller at the time that we started. So going back and search, well, there wasn't search back in those days. You had to go to the library and look up in indexes, and it was actually hard to find papers. But the base of papers that you needed to read was much smaller, I think. So yeah, one good place that AI tools come in terms of helping summarize and point to where what's important and what you might be reading and what the scope is of papers. So yeah, I think we can use those tools to help the generations understand more, and we all use those tools now to help understand the base out there. But yeah, I think it's a lot harder now, and it's pretty tough. But I also put my old man hat on again. I think we publish too much. There's too speaking from an editor of ITCon Journal as well as what I've seen over W78, that minimal publishable unit idea still seems to be there, and we're getting papers which are on very small things rather than larger ideas or bigger, more complete projects. And I think that pressure on young researchers to have 4 or 5 papers at the end of the PhD wasn't there when I went through, and I'm not sure that a PhD by papers is helping that, because there's a lot more pressure now to publish and be published there, and we're just in this endless loop where 4 papers is not enough. Now you need 5, and in a few years' time you'll need 6 or 7, and where does that stop? And that's I don't know if we can take a step back. It's kind of we're stuck in this loop, but I think taking a step back would be a good thing for the community, to have a smaller number of much higher quality and much more complete papers coming out in conferences and journals would actually help us more.
Yeah. And we've seen yesterday on the opening of the thank you for that. And we've seen yesterday on the opening that the number of rejections, the percentage of rejections rises. So to maybe put an end to this spiral. And speaking about this very conference, as a last point, and thank you so much for your answers from the panelists. As a last point for today, I would like to ask Mariana to come up to the stage, because one of the perks of going to a conference is also to get awards, and one of those awards is named after Reimer Scherer, who sits down here in the first row. And you also have met paths early on in your career. And as you know, EC3 has an award that goes out to members of the audience or of the community that have contributed a lot. But I hand it over to Mariana.
Thank you, and please let me also say some words. So thank you very much. This was very, very interesting, and it really showed in a great way the great contribution Robert Amor has done for this community. And I know the EC3 is a younger community, but I think that this conference really shows that we are growing into a great blended family, which is really, really, I think, a great thing that's happening. So yes, it's truly my pleasure to give Robert Amor, this EC3 Scherer Award for his great contribution to the computing community. So,
and join me in giving him a hand, please.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Robert. Sorry? Thank you very much, Robert, for being good sports on this surprise. You didn't have a choice, did you? But it was a great pleasure. Also going back, and we really, really hope that you can keep you around in the community for much longer, even without having to have an organizers and the chairs hat on. But we're looking forward to many more years with you. But thank you for all the way that you took this community and all the hard work you have put into getting us all together forward. Thanks.
And in conclusion, I would ask all the audience to come please to the podium so we take a group photo.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.